Greetings. Thank you for joining me today. And I am blessed to have as my guest Eric Sammons. Eric.
Great. Good to be here. It's an honor actually to finally talk to you in person, Joseph. You're kind of a personal hero of mine for the
Oh,
work you do,
wow.
reaching out to the LGBT, whatever it's called, population, and all the work you've done. It's been a big inspiration to both my wife and I.
Wow. Thank you. Well, you're one of the people, because most of the people, I'm trying to think any of the people on here, maybe one or two of the people that I've talked to so far on my little podcast I've met in person. But
Right.
I mean, everybody else is kind of like, I know you, I kind of like we're friends,
Right.
because it's just we've known each other
Yes, exactly.
on
Yeah, that's
social
right.
media.
Yeah.
It's kind of bizarre. And
Yeah.
and I guess we kind of know all the same people.
Right,
It's
exactly. That's right. And I also want to mention that, I just recently, for everybody watching, got this
oh yes,
beautiful,
thank
my
you.
wife got me this for my birthday. My old rosary, after 20 some years, had finally met its maker. And so she bought me this beautiful rosary, and I've had it now for just a couple of weeks, but I love it. So thank you for making that. And we got
I
that for
I
you
I
guys.
made that.
Yeah. That's right.
During the lockdown here in California was pretty quick and it was pretty severe. It was like like the second week of March,
Right.
and the only retail, well, the only, I mean, of course, the churches were closed, but the only like things that were open were like grocery stores, pharmacies, that's it, like
Right.
Walmart. So I had nothing to do, so I started making rosaries,
That's
and it just
great.
yeah, it kept me kind of sane. So
Yeah, that's great.
I've made like over 100, I think.
Wow. Wow.
I,
They're
I've
beautiful.
kept I've kept doing. It's very relaxing. I like to do
Yes.
it.
My wife makes the rosaries, and she makes those, the rope ones. And she finds it very relaxing, like just something to do with her hands when she's either like hanging out with the kids or doing something, and she loves doing it. It helps to bring her peace to make them.
It's very repetitive. I really like it. So, and I
Right.
can kick out like maybe two or three in a day. So
It's great.
you're a pretty prolific writer. So you've written books, and you also write for the internet too.
Yes.
So how long have you been writing? I mean, like on Catholic topics? Quite a
My
while.
my I'd say it's been about 10 years. My first book was published in 2010, and that's really when I started writing a lot online as well, articles. And so really it's been about a full 10 years now I've been doing it.
Wow. Okay. I like that. It's nice to talk to people who have written a lot, because there's a lot to cover, but then
Right.
it's difficult too because there's just a lot there. And
Right.
and especially with you, I kind of had to limit myself. So I picked just a few articles and things you've written, and like always, I link those in the description to the video. So the first one I want to talk to you about is called The Antidote for Decaying Fatherhood. And this was on 1 Peter 5. And this was just from last year.
Mhm.
And right in the opening, you say, I would argue that a primary cause of modern destruction is the loss of an understanding of true fatherhood. And that's kind of, I mean, I named this podcast Finding Our Father. It's the reoccurring sort of issue. It's kind of funny. A gay guy, is really interested in the issue or whatever, ex-gay guy, is interested in the issue of fatherhood. And I think because if you look at somebody like me, if fathers don't do your job, in many ways, somebody like me in my life is the end result. So that's why I'm so interested in it, and it's why I've focused on that issue. And I've talked to priests and also lay guys like you, who who
Right.
who write on the issue, and not that many do. Would you say it?
Yeah, I do think it's something that's not really addressed as much as it should, and it's related, of course, just in general masculinity,
Yeah,
that we have this problem of with the feminist movement, with this with the homosexual movement, this idea that we're really undercutting masculinity, because now masculinity is always toxic. It's always, I mean, it's like you just can't be a man. I mean, you can't open a door for a lady. You can't call somebody ma'am. I mean, just, which are minor things, I know, but it's a symptom of the problem that a man can't be a man. And and you see it in movies, because either a man is either presented as a weakling who just does whatever the women around him tell him to do, or he's presented as a jerk and who's, a truly toxic, because you can't have a masculinity that's toxic. You can take it to this extreme where you're rude to people and you just do whatever you want. That's not true masculinity. And I feel like we've lost it. And I honestly feel like that's true both in fathers, biological fathers, but also our spiritual fathers, priests and bishops. When you see them given so easily and not being masculine and standing up for the church in society, we're seeing that right now with all the restrictions. And you see even bishops who get it a little bit, and they understand that we're not on the same side as the people in the government, maybe. Even all they ever do is talk. They just say, oh, we can't do, this is not right. We shouldn't do this. But then they go along with it, and they'll shut down the masses. I mean, here in Ohio, back in March, the bishop shut down public celebration of mass in the whole state, but it was never required by the governor. They just decide that because the governor basically shamed them to do it, and they weren't man enough to say, hey. Now I will give them credit. Recently they did announce we don't plan on doing it again. I don't care what, we don't care what the governor says. We'll see. But I just feel like that's a symptom. And so for spiritual fathers, it's a real problem. But also in biological fathers of children, you see that a lot, where kids get to do whatever they want. I mean, these young men, they grow up playing video games all the time. They become fathers. And I know people who, the dad, basically at the end of the day at work, he'll go down to the basement and play video games and not really be with his wife, not spend time with his kids. And I feel like this isn't an anti-video game thing. This is more just the idea of that a man has a role to play in his family to be the leader. And too often, they don't lead. They should be the one who's setting, okay, we're going to pray the rosary at this time during the week, and we're going to make sure we do these prayers. We'll make sure we go to mass. We make sure the kids are well behaved, those type of things. Too many men, especially in the spiritual, they cede authority to their wife, and their wife, God bless them, might be saints and doing their best. But the husband needs to step up and say, okay, I am the head of this household. I am the spiritual head. I am to be the protector, the provider, the priest of the family. And too often they don't step up and they don't do that.
I was going to try to lead you on this conversation. You just condensed it into 5 something you mentioned though too, and I wasn't going to ask you this, but a bell just went off in my head. Is it something I'm kind of fascinated with too? Is it the only thing I think that keeps the movie industry going right now are these superhero films, which mainly appeal to boys and teenagers and men, but also the video games, which I don't play, but I have people in my family that play them, and the movies and the video games are like hyper masculine, and I don't see the superhero movies either, but I mean they're very cross cultural. They appeal to all different classes of men.
Right.
The one I do remember seeing was like the first Captain America, where it was this very wimpy guy, becomes like insanely masculine, and so it's interested me that maybe a culture which doesn't value masculinity, maybe in reality, but in the fantasy world, it's like idolized. It's
a great point, because I think the reason that some of these superhero movies are so popular is because they do reflect things that we naturally know are important. The self-sacrifice, for example, that the superhero gives. And Captain America is actually a good example of one of the good ones that does project a good masculinity. And so it was very popular. But of course, like everything, Hollywood ruins everything. And so what they've done is they've now gone woke. And so all the more recent ones and the ones they're playing doing, it's always these women who are the superheroes who act like men. I mean, Hollywood cannot make a strong woman anymore figure who isn't basically just a woman acting like a man. They don't understand that a woman, her strength comes from a different way than a man. But I do think the popularity of superhero movies does reflect this deep desire that we have in our hearts for a truly masculine person who is willing to self-sacrifice. And that's probably the number one, I would say, virtue of a truly masculine person, is that he will self-sacrifice for the good of those in his charge, who he's charged to protect, whether it be his family, his parish, his diocese, whatever. He will give up and he will sacrifice for them.
Yeah, yeah. I want to talk about that with you too. One of the things that interested me too in this article, that but you mentioned it very briefly, but education, which doesn't seem to favor or what's the word? Take into account the difference between boys and girls. When I was getting my master's
Right.
degree in history, one of the options I had was to get my credential here in California, my teaching credential, and I went ahead and did it. And I've never taught because I hated it. When I was when I was in the credential program, there was a time towards the end when we were in the classroom with real teachers and students and stuff. And this was high school, because I was getting my secondary credential, not my primary. And especially with the boys, I could see in the history class, they just did not want to be there. And I kind of understood, because I was like, well, I mean, these things are important. I love history, but they just were interested in other things. I thought they would have done very good in like a trade, more of a
Right.
trade program, where maybe, because I think at the time we were talking about the Industrial Revolution or something, and they didn't really need to know all this stuff. And I
Yeah,
felt very sorry for them that they were stuck in a classroom
right.
in a very like college lecture format, which I hate too. But
Right.
and then when I had to step in and teach a sample class, that's what I ended up doing, and it didn't work. So
Yeah, our education system is very one size fits all, and it's very much geared towards young ladies, for girls, because you sit in the classroom still, you listen, you don't interrupt, you don't use your hands, you just sit there.
sorry to interrupt you, but yeah, the girls did very well in that
Right.
format, very well. Yeah.
They're really very much made for it. But a lot of young men, I will be honest, I love school and I did great in it, and that was something I excelled in. But most, like my own son, for example, he's very much a physical person, and he learns very well. He picks up any sport, he picks up physical activities very quickly. But he as a young boy, he did not want to sit still. Now we homeschooled him, so we were able to work around. We could allow him to sit upside down on a couch while he's reading and things like that, whereas you get in trouble for that if you're in a public school situation or a traditional school situation. And so I really feel like the education, like you said, not only is it bad for young boys because they all get diagnosed with ADHD, whatever it's called, early when they're just being boys, but then as they get older, especially high school level, a lot of young men would be so much better off if they're geared towards trades, and they're not. But we tell them all, no, you have to go to a 4-year academic college, and a lot of them, like, they would do great as plumbers, as electricians, and things that are a great career, honest pay and everything. And but it's like,
Yeah.
no, we're just going to stick them in this class for 4 years, get them huge college debt, and say, hey, there we go, there's the answer.
Yeah, it's interesting. Because I remembered something, because when I was doing my student teaching previously, I had passed, I think it was called the CBEST test, and so I could substitute. So I was at this high school, and actually they had a machine shop course at that time, and I remember when I subbed, and I had no idea what to do, but I subbed. I was essentially babysitting, and I remember the boys that were in the history course that I was sitting in and were in those courses. And of course they were doing,
Right.
yeah, very well. And
Yeah.
it was sad, because not everybody's meant to go to college. Not that
Right.
they're dumb, not that they're dumb,
Yeah,
but
it's a different type of intelligence.
yeah, yeah. So, and then this is important, because this is the point I've tried to make. I probably made it ad nauseum, but I think the family and fatherhood, in a family transfers over to the priesthood in the church, because I mean every priest comes from a family. They had a mother, they had a
Right.
father, and they experienced family, and they experienced the dynamic between their own father. So I think what happens in the laity affects the church later on. Well,
Absolutely.
yeah, and you wrote the parish. This was interesting. You wrote the parish pastor has become the impotent head of a democracy. You know, I mean, I know what you mean. Could you explain that a little bit? I mean, I know
Yeah,
exactly what you
in
mean.
your typical parish setup now, there's this swing back. There's this idea of the bad old days where the priest was the dictator of the parish. Well, whether or not that was true, I don't know. I didn't live back then, but I do know that the exact opposite extreme is now, where a pastor has almost no real authority in practice. He can, if he said, for example, no, we're not going to do these songs anymore, he would be run out of town if he said we're not going to do On Eagle's Wings anymore or Be Not Afraid or whatever ditty that they want to sing.
Here I am, Lord.
Yeah, here I am. Thank you.
Right.
And I mean, and so that just proves that he has no real authority if he can't even change, if he can't ban a song, for example. And everything has to go usually through a committee. He just doesn't really, and I think that's a real problem of fatherhood, because a father, he's not a dictator of his family, but he is the head. So a father of family, if he believes something's good for the family, he doesn't need to get a vote from everybody. Now, if he's a good husband, he's going to consult with his wife, see what she thinks, and get input. But ultimately, he's going to make the call like, I really think this is what's best for the family, so we're going to do it. There's no vote taken. And that's what a pastor of a parish should do. Yes, of course, he gets input from the parishioners. He learns and figures it out and uses prudence, but ultimately he makes the decision, say, here's what we're doing because it's best for souls. But you just don't see that in almost any parish anymore. It's usually the church ladies who are running it.
Yes. Yes. It's difficult, I think, to reboot that too, because I think most people. Well, I was born in '69. You're younger than me, so
Only by a year.
really 1970.
Yeah, yeah.
My gosh. Okay, I thought you were more younger.
Well,
Um,
thank you.
yeah. So, I mean, a lot of people's experience with families, I think, are not probably with where the father was typically the head. I mean,
Right.
yeah. I mean, what I've seen lately is that because men have sort of checked out of the family, women have had to step
Right.
forward, and they try to do everything, and that's where you get, I think that's where you get the idea of the power mom and the soccer mom, and that
Right.
who has to manage the kids and the father as
Right.
well.
And it's all, I mean, the culture's telling the men to shut up and get out of the way, and it's telling the women to take over. But in a lot of cases, the woman, the mother, the wife has no choice because the dad has checked out and she's doing her best. So she's the one who's saying, we got to pray the rosary. She's the one who's saying, we got to make sure the kids go to mass. She's the one who's saying, let's make sure this happens, because if she doesn't, it won't happen. And so God bless her. But really, in that case, it's the man who has to step up and say, no, I'm the leader. And so we're going to do rosary. We're going to go to mass. We're going to make sure the kids are educated in their faith, and we charitable projects and all that stuff. The man really should be the lead on those things.
And then you have to figure too that half of families are divorced.
Yes, right,
So typically, I don't know, because I have so many friends that are divorced. Is it typically a lot of times the children are full time with the mom, part time with the
right,
dad, or they're split between mom and dad. But then a lot of times the parents have remarried, and then it becomes
yeah,
more complicated. It becomes even
absolutely,
more
yeah.
complicated too,
Yeah, and
because these are.
divorce is really one of the foundational problems in our society today. The acceptance of divorce just, it leads to such a mess in every situation, because nobody's really the head anymore of the family. Or, and like you said, if they get remarried, now the stepdad, is he supposed to step in and be the head of this father when the real father is down living in an apartment down across town? It's a mess. And that's why the Jesus was against divorce. I mean, it ends up being a terrible situation.
It gets complicated really quick, and then the children are trapped in the middle.
Right.
And I think they get in a sense a lot of times, although it's not on purpose, they get kind of left behind or left out.
Yeah.
So and then in this article, which I love Saint Joseph, he's my patron saint, and a lot of times I have to be careful because sometimes I love him more than Christ himself. I got to be careful. I just turn to him constantly, every day. And you wrote, in Saint Joseph, we have the epitome of the cardinal virtues. I had to remind myself what were the cardinal virtues, and the model for fatherhood that our world and the church desperately need. Thank you. You wrote, a good father knows when it's time to fight to protect his family, but he also knows when avoiding conflict is the best protection. This reminded me of my dad, because my father, God rest his soul, my dad was very devoted to St. Joseph my whole life. And my father and I had, at best, it was a difficult relationship. It got better later. But my dad, I think, was good at that. He kind of knew, I don't know, I think dads, a lot of times, especially when there's a boy that is wayward, is off track, I think dads a lot of times will step back, let mom kind of handle it, because moms are loving and compassionate, and they can kind of just love the child back to health and sanity and the church and goodness, which doesn't always happen. But I think dads let moms try. But I think, and my dad did hang back for a long time, but then he did, when he knew he had to, he did step forward. So
Right.
that's a dynamic when I think husband and wife, man and women work really well.
Right.
I think moms sometimes have a more difficult time putting their foot down.
Right. I mean, women are more naturally going to be the one who comforts the young boy when he's sad, when he's hurt. It's like the classic example would be your son's climbing up on a tree, falls down, scrapes his knee, hurts himself. The mom runs and hugs him, makes sure, are you okay? Gives him kisses. So the dad's like, you're okay. Just put some dirt on it. And it's like and that's okay. And what I always say is both of those reactions are good. Neither, assuming the kid's not actually really hurt, that would not be good just to say put some dirt on it. But both are good, and the son needs to see both of those reactions. He needs to see that he has this loving comfort of the mother he can always go to, but he also needs to see that as a man, you need to be able to not be a wimp. You need to be able to stand up for yourself. You need to be able to accept injury at times and hurt and pain, and not let it take over your life and things like that. So I think both of those, and that's why in a good marriage you have this the complementarity of the sexes. And I think for young girls it's good too, because the young girls need to see what a good man is and what it means to be a man, because then when she is older and she's looking and she's potentially looking to get married, she's not going after these guys who are lame and terrible and would be terrible husbands and fathers, but she's attracted then to the qualities that hopefully her father also displayed.
Yeah. And then I like, again, because I think all of these have a mirror reality in the church, you wrote, justice at times goes beyond just fulfilling the obligations of our state and life. Sometimes it means protecting the innocent and the oppressed. Spiritual fathers in particular must work for justice within the church to combat the deep corruption that currently runs rampant within her. Thank you.
And just too much cowardice among the clergy. And that's one of the main reasons we are where we are. I mean, when you just call something a corrupt institution, which I would say currently the Catholic Church is a corrupt institution, the hierarchy, that doesn't mean every single individual is corrupt. What it means is in every organization, you're going to have the bad seeds, you're going to have the good ones. And usually that's a small number of each. And so what makes it corrupt is what the majority do. Do they allow the bad ones to run rampant, or do they side with the good ones? And what we're seeing is that the vast majority of bishops and priests, they end up allowing the corruption, the McCarricks and those people to run rampant. And that's what makes it corrupt. Not that every individual bishop is corrupt, but that they allow corruption to fester and to happen because they don't have the courage and they don't see the justice that this is justice for the innocent, for those who have been abused, for those who have been physically abused, obviously, but also spiritually abused, and they don't stand up for it. And that's something a father does. If a father, I mean, if a biological father knows that his child is being abused, a good father, what's he going to do? He's going to get a shotgun. Yet what we saw was so many bishops and priests, they saw and they knew innocent, their children, their flock, being abused, and they just looked the other way. And what good father would ever look away if his own kid, something was happening to him? I mean, that's one reason why, not these aren't absolute statements, but a lot of the reason the victims are often preyed upon are those who don't have always strong fathers that will protect them, because the predators know they have a sixth sense of knowing how to find the ones who will be more easily preyed upon.
Here, Eric. Yeah, that was me. That's why I was going to talk to you about this, but this is why I'm very open to the married priesthood in the Catholic Church. And I used to kind of just think about it, but now I'm really, because I think, like you said, a father would have a very visceral reaction,
right,
to one of their child being abused. And I think
that's why I don't get is how they don't have this visceral reaction. I mean, when I even think about it, I get sick to my stomach, and I just don't understand when you see somebody like a Cardinal Mahoney and he's giving his testimony and he's asked about these things and he's talking about it like, oh, I didn't really know, I don't know this. And it's like, I mean, did you lose all sense of morality, all sense of justice? I mean, because when you know somebody is being a young person, especially, is being abused in this fashion, your sense of justice should be such righteous anger that your first reaction honestly should be that you want to physically do violence against that person. Now, you might just realize, okay, it's not appropriate in this situation, we're going to use the police and all this stuff, but that should be your visceral reaction. And as far as married priesthood, I used to be completely against it in the West. Obviously, it's always existed in the East. But I agree with you in the sense that I do think there are some solid arguments for it now, because I know a lot of good men, especially like a man who perhaps is a little bit older and in his maybe 50s or 60s. His kids maybe they're not young, so they don't need that constant. Maybe they're in high school or even graduated. But he's a real man. He's been a father. He's proven he's raised kids, and now it's like that's a person who I think it would be a lot harder for. First of all, he's not going to get groomed in seminary, and second of all, if a bishop tells him to look the other way, he's just going to say, "Screw you! I'm not doing that." And it's like if he gets fired, whatever, he just kind of goes back to whatever he was doing. He doesn't have to. He doesn't have that absolute. I mean, obviously priests should have a certain level of obedience to their bishops, but he doesn't have that slavish obedience where he can't stand up because his whole livelihood depends upon it. He could just say, I'm going, maybe he's only a part-time priest, he's working in a parish, but he's still got his job, kind of like a lot of permanent deacons do today. Perhaps that's it. But the point is that I do think there are reasons to be open to it now that I wouldn't have said even, maybe 10 years ago, I might not have thought.
Yeah. I mean, over the years, I've kind of inched east, and I've gotten to be friends with Russian Orthodox priests and Orthodox Church of America priests, and they're married. Mm-hmm. And some of them, I don't know a lot of them very, very well, but some of them have a job, during the week.
Right.
And then on the weekends, they're at the parish.
Right.
And I have to say, I'm not downing Catholic priests, because I know some Catholic priests that are wonderful men. They're just living, martyrs. Yes. But I have to say that these priests who have like 5 or 6 kids, a wife, another job, I mean, a full-time job, I find them more accessible, more readily available to talk to me and give me spiritual direction than a Catholic priest.
Right. Right.
Figure that out.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I know.
I think the one thing I would say is how we do things would have to radically change in order to incorporate married priests, because a married man can't support his family on what a Catholic priest as an associate pastor at a parish could do.
They have to have a job. They have to have a job.
It would just wouldn't work. It would have to, so you'd have to rethink a lot of things. But I think actually if he had a job outside, like I said, that would give him a certain independence where if he was asked to do something immoral by his bishop or by his pastor or whatever, he'd just be like, no. And if he got fired, it's like, okay, well, fine, but I'm not going along. And I think also it would put a check on bishops from pushing the priest to do something that he shouldn't do, because they know they just lose him. They don't have that power over him as much as they would otherwise. And so I think there's some benefits to that. I still think it's very important to have a celibate clergy on some level. Like in the East, they do, the bishops and the monks are celibate. And I do think that's a symbol and a sign that needs to stay in the church always, because I think it reminds us of a higher calling than the married life. So we always need to have that. But I do think there could be some workings around.
The only thing that worries me about the married priesthood in the Catholic Church, I'm running a tangent, but is that we would end up with, a very leftist priest, but who's married. Right. Because so one thing that's concerned me is where I've seen in some diaconate programs, there's like a parallel program in the diocese for the wives. And it seems like sometimes the wives are like, it's like deaconess and the deacon, they're overly involved. Right. And then we would end up with like the married priest and, Mrs. Priest. And that's the only thing that would worry me.
Yeah. I will say in the Eastern churches, they do have a tradition of the priest's wife being kind of a mother figure in the parish. And that can be good in some ways, but yeah. And the truth is that the permanent deacon program hasn't had the greatest success, frankly, because a lot of them just are unimpressive. Now I say that, I have a couple of friends who are permanent deacons, are great. In fact, one of my best friends just entered in permanent deacon program, and I think he'll be awesome at it. But overall, it's can be an unimpressive group of men as far as their knowledge of the church, of theology, of what it means to be Catholic. And it's just almost like they're like 60-some-year-old men who retire and they kind of like going to church. So they're just like, oh, I guess I'll be a permanent deacon. And that's not what we want.
No, yeah. Okay, now this was kind of a warm up to, I love that article. This article is really great. This was from January 9th, 2020. And it was titled, No Church for Young Men. This is it's fairly lengthy, but it's a fairly quick read.
That has been by far my most popular and most influential article I've ever written. In 10 years, none got the response that one did. It really struck a chord that I wasn't even expecting, because like as you said, I write a ton of articles and I get, various levels of response, and that's great. I love it when I do. But that one was like, blew me away how many people really seemed it struck a chord with them.
I know. Well, I use like yellow. I use like yellow, and I like yellowed the whole thing. So let me get going here. So you wrote, if parishes want children to retain their faith in adulthood, which is the purpose of youth ministry, they should focus not on the children, but on the father. Very good. Very good. Because me growing up, it was a little different in the 70s. I grew up in San Francisco and in the Bay Area. The liturgy was fairly progressive, I guess. And the priests were pretty left, pretty liberal. But I do remember growing up as a kid, more families there. My dad certainly went. I went, my brothers and sisters went to Mass, and my mom. As a teenager, and then this is in the 1980s, not so much. It seems like the families were thinning out. It was more older people,
Right.
and then sometimes mom or grandma with kids. And then the 90s, I was gay, so I was gone from the church. And then I came back in 99, and it seemed like it had, at the bottom, had dropped out. And
Right.
I didn't see any men
Right.
at all. None. I mean, they were very old. Like at that time, my mom and dad were still going, and they were older, and a bunch of older people, and it was pretty.
Yeah, and the basic point of the article is that everybody agrees we need to do what we can to keep young people in the church so that they, when they grow up, they'll remain Catholic. We all know that most young people who grow up Catholic leave the practice of the faith. And so what the church has done is it's done the kind of the obvious solution. Okay, well, we'll pour all this time and resources into youth ministry because that's what the Protestants do. And it makes sense on the surface that if you want young people to stay, well, you focus on the young people. But I would argue that the real solution is counterintuitive because what we found is that kids who stay, what the reason they stay is because of their parents, the way they raise them at home. So if some parent barely practices the faith but drops their kid off at youth group, the chances are very, very high the kid's going to leave the church, no matter how great that youth group is. And that's the thing, is I'm not disparaging youth ministers, many of whom work tirelessly and work hard, and they have some successes, but the very structure of how it's done just doesn't work. But what you need is you need the parents. But what the studies have shown is you really need the father. Because if the father practices his faith and takes his faith seriously, the kids are exponentially more likely to practice the faith, both boys and girls, when they get older. And so to me, that means, okay, we need to focus on making sure that the parish brings in young men and keeps them. And my honest opinion is, I can't remember the line I used, but something to the effect of when you walk into a typical Catholic parish, it's like a 1970s, gay bar or something like that. I mean, it just, the ambiance is so bad that it just, just everything about it, the architecture, the songs, the way the priest talks, the way the gaggle of women who come up to be Eucharistic ministers, everything about it. I was watching the other day, I don't know why there's somebody that did, I was watching a live stream mass of a local parish that was just a local typical parish, and I haven't been to a normal parish like that in a long time.
Normal.
I go to a Latin mass parish.
I want to get into that too.
Yeah, so but I watched it and I just thought it was just so striking to me how completely not only unattractive but like antagonistically anti-masculine it was. And I thought to myself, there's not a 22-year-old man alive who's normal and in their masculinity who would want to step foot in there, who would want to be seen in there. And yet that's what a lot of parishes are like. And I think that's one of the main reasons why we lose all the kids.
You took my funny story away, Eric.
Sorry, go ahead and tell it.
No, here it is. No, because usually when I'm reading these kind of things, they're fairly serious, studies, explorations of an important topic. But I laughed out loud of this line. I was howling. You wrote, the primary thing that needs to be done is to destroy the current ambiance found in most parishes, which is only attractive to gay men of the 1970s. I just laughed.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
That's what I call.
You really hit. Oh
yeah, that line, I called it a John Zmirak line because he's like the best at writing those things that you're just laughing out loud yet still serious. And so when every once in a while one will come to me and I think that's a Zmirak line right there.
It's true. It's true. That's really, but it's so sad because that's. Yeah. Oh my gosh, because I grew up, with quite. Priests, in my experience as a kid, were always Irish, because here in the Bay Area, they were all foreign-born Irish. They come FBIs, I think, or what was it? Oh yeah, foreign-born Irish.
Right.
And quite nice a lot of times, but I don't know. They were kind of like, I had a hard time distinguishing them as men. Isn't that kind of strange? Right. They were almost like little leprechauns.
Right.
And I don't know, they weren't women, but I
Right.
didn't really see them as men. They weren't like my dad, who was a
Right.
man. They weren't like the sisters in turtlenecks at the parish, but it was quite strange. But then the mass became, especially as the 70s went on, it became very more off-putting because, well, the music, the St. Louis Jesuits is what
Right. Yes.
I mainly remember. But then the priest too, um, quite off-putting when I was a boy, uh, coming down from the sanctuary during the sermon,
Right.
or during the kiss of peace, coming down and
Right.
mingling, and then what really bothered me as a boy was the priest would invite the kids from the congregation out of the pews and then to form a circle around the alt table, you could
Right.
call it. And then we would hold hands during what essentially, I guess, is the consecration. It just, oh, it was seemed so
Yeah.
strange to me.
Everything
Even as
about
a
it
little boy,
is feminine. Yeah.
but I couldn't articulate it as either feminine or masculine. It just seemed
Right.
not off.
Yes, right, exactly. And I think, and the thing is, it's like there's the good number of priests that are just they're pretty left, they're probably gay, and they just have issues. But I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about the priests who are good intentioned, good men, but they're so in the status quo of the church, like growing up in the seminary and everything. I don't think they recognize how off-putting your average normal Catholic parish is to a normal guy. That it just is very I'm just talking about just a normal guy who's in his 20s. He's not like some Joe Rambo or anything. I'm not saying that, but he's just normal. He does not want, his idea of a good time would be maybe going to a sports bar, or going to just playing sports or doing something like that, or hunting or something like that. Just not like super Rambo, but just normal guy stuff. Well, walking into a typical Catholic parish is emasculating. I mean, literally, the second you walk in, you feel like you're emasculated. And I just feel like that is really undercuts our witness to families, because the men want nothing to do with it. And now you have the mothers. You see this so often, where you'll see a family where it's the mom and 2 or 3 kids, and the dad's not there. And because the dad's not coming because he doesn't want to be seen in there. Now, yes, if he knows what's going on, if he has faith to know that's the Eucharist, he should be there. But the whole point is we're trying to make it so he sees that more clearly. That for those men who don't have a strong faith, we're trying to build them up, so we don't want to do things that would turn them off. And I'm also convinced that a truly masculine environment does not turn off women, because I think women, that's the secret that people don't understand. A feminine environment turns off men, but a masculine environment does not turn off women, because if it's done correctly, obviously I'm not talking about some hyper toxic masculine thing, but a true masculine environment, because it's the priest leading it, both men and women will both follow men in the battle, so to speak, but a man won't follow a woman in general. And so when you see the priest leading the troops in the battle, so to speak, as a true leader, men and women will follow. But if the obvious leaders of the parish are the gaggle of Eucharistic ministers and the music minister lady and stuff like that, the men are just going to be like, I'm out of here.
Yes, yes. And in the Bay Area too, especially in San Francisco, I remember that because when I came back to the church in 1999, and I had been pretty much away from the church. The only association I would say I had with the church in the 90s was that I'd go to funerals because some of the Catholic priests were quite good, especially in the earlier days in the like late 80s. They were quite charitable in terms of people who had died of AIDS,
Mm-hmm.
because there was still such a stigma about it,
Right.
and they were quite good in terms of that. But then, but then I ended up in the mid '90s going to gay weddings that were often officiated by not typically, I can't recall in the actual church building, but off church grounds
Uh-huh.
where a priest would officiate, I guess you could say.
right,
at a gay wedding. So that was my experience with the Catholic Church in the 90s. Then I came back in 99. I still recognize that a lot of parishes had a very like leftist social justice warrior atmosphere
right.
about it. So I don't know in terms of men how attractive or unattractive that's going to be. I mean, it's going to attract a certain kind of, I guess, of liberal leftist
Right.
guy that would be interested in that, but I don't know. You give 7 suggestions in here, right?
I think that sounds about right.
7, yeah, seven suggestions on how to change the church. Would you say, or
I mean, I would
change
change like the
how to make?
ambiance of a parish in a
Okay,
sense.
yeah,
What your experience, a person's experience at the parish, and a lot of this is stuff that I don't remember all of them off the top of my head, but
I'll
is
remind you.
subliminal. Like I know the first one was the ad orientem worship.
I'll
The
remind you.
Yeah, the idea of the priest facing toward the same direction as the people, towards the altar, towards God in worship. And that is, of course, a simple thing in one sense. All the priests do is turn around, but a very difficult thing politically because most bishops would freak out if a priest
Eric,
did that.
Eric, can I ask you first?
Sure.
Because I think this is always a story within a story. I mean, how it's kind of like coming out. How did you like come out to like a TLM, or how did you that process of going to the traditional Latin mass? I mean,
Well,
how?
it's funny. I came to appreciate the importance of traditional liturgy through the East. I'm Roman Catholic. I was Protestant, grew up, became Roman Catholic in the 90s. And then I just went to your typical parishes. And then in the around 2000, early 2000s, I was always very interested, and I studied the Eastern rites, so Eastern Orthodox and Eastern Catholic. So I started every once in a while I go to Eastern Catholic churches, and this was in Washington D.C. There's a Melkite church there, which has a beautiful liturgy, and it turned like something in my brain that I thought, this is the way it should be. Not necessarily that, Eastern liturgy, Western liturgy. I'm just saying, but the reverence here, the built-in reverence here of the iconostasis that blocks off the people from the altar, the fact that the priest is facing ad orientem towards the altar with it, all the chanting and the incense and the bells and all that. I was like, it was like this thing where I just knew this was the way it should be, and I didn't know why I thought that. And so then I started studying the liturgy and studying what it means, and I thought, wow, okay, I get it now. So then I went once or a couple times, maybe 2 or 3 times, to a Latin mass when I was living there in DC. And I remember going to this solemn high mass with all these people, seminarian servants, that was just absolutely blew me. It was Feast of the Presentation, and it blew me away how beautiful it was. But I remember thinking, like, this reminds me of those Eastern liturgies I went to. And it's because they both have this built-in reverence, this built-in worship of God that just made sense to me. And so then when I ended up moving to Florida, and the reality was there was just no parishes that I considered good enough to bring my kids to, in the sense that I didn't
Oh
feel like
no.
it was reverent enough. I wanted my kid, because the parish I went to was a
Uh,
Novus Ordo parish in Maryland, which was fine, but then so there was a Latin Mass parish, FSSP parish nearby. I was like, well, I guess I'll go there. And my wife and I both weren't like, oh, we're Latin Mass only people or anything like that. We just were like, it's the only one we felt was reverent enough to imbibe in our kids the importance of that. Well, then I started going that regularly, and that just grew and grew and grew my love for it. And that was 9 years ago, I guess. And so that's what we go. We moved into Ohio later, but we go to a Latin Mass now as well. And it just was something to me that I don't even know why, because I mean, I grew up Protestant and I grew up Methodist. It wasn't like a high church tradition. I don't know why, but something just innately in me told me this is how you worship God. And like I said, it was first in the East, but then I saw, and I'm a Western guy at heart. That's my spirituality. You see all my icons, I love the East. But it's, as far as like, I love the Rosary, I love the Divine Office of the West and stuff like that. I love the Latin Mass. But I always say, like, when I go to an Eastern Catholic liturgy, I always say that's like, I love it, but that's like a vacation for me, Whereas when I go, I still want to go home, which is the Latin Mass. So that's kind of my home. But so really it was this idea of this worship that was very reverent, very serious. That's another part of it, very serious. And I do believe it's masculine as well. Now, obviously, when I say that, I'm not saying it's just for men. Obviously, it's not, but it's attractive to men. In fact, if you look at the percentages, for example, of men and women who are practicing in different faiths, the Eastern Orthodox have a much higher percentage of men than the Catholics do, because their liturgy is more masculine. And actually the most extreme, I think, is the Muslims. And I'm not saying we use them as an example, but they have a very masculine attitude towards it. And I don't think we should go that extreme, but I do think like the Eastern Orthodox have done a better job of keeping that balanced between the two, because they have a built-in naturally masculine liturgy that doesn't turn men away. I don't remember the figures, but it's much closer to 50%, maybe even a little over 50% for them. Whereas for us, it's like men practicing are only like in the high 30s or 40s, something like that.
I've gone to Eastern liturgy, not Catholic, but it is like an endurance test, especially the high holidays. Because you're like, you're standing for like 3 hours.
Oh yeah.
And
their fasting rules, everything about their fasting rules are hardcore. And the Eastern Catholics, they follow these as well. And so it just really is something that raises. And I think one of my points is something that effect too, that part of what the church needs to do is have these high ideals that we strive towards, that we're trying to reach these high ideals. And I have my, in fact,
what about the 5-minute homily?
Yeah, if you say something very good and solid, it works. There's nothing wrong with it. I've heard great 5-minute homilies and terrible 20-minute homilies, but
it's mandated.
I do think
in some,
the key is what you say,
Well, mandated.
Yes, now it is.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
No. When I started going to the Latin Mass in 1999, it was still kind of more underground,
right?
In the catacombs.
Yes.
And I came back to the faith, and I had a few friends, mainly in the Courage group. And when I told them, I was going to the Latin Mass, it was kind of like, worse than coming out as gay, because it was like, what is that? Where is this? Yeah. What is that?
Fortunately, we've come a long way since then.
Yeah, so. None of the parishes like typically offered it. I used to go to a Novus Ordo parish, but then the fraternity priest would come in, and say mass and leave. It was quite strange.
Right. Yeah.
So and then you would just go to the parish and then leave. There was not much of a community. But because you talked to, I want to explore this a little bit with you if you have time. Mm-hmm. What struck me, I should say first, is that when I came back to the church in '99, not knowing what to do, I didn't know what to do. So I just went to the parish near the neighborhood, and of course it was like my experience as a kid, in the church, and I really quickly bailed, and I got super duper frustrated. But I guess God, St. Joseph, wanted me in the church, and then somehow a priest told me that there was this Latin Mass, and I had no idea. You were raised Protestant, but I was 1970s Catholic. Latin was the thing that the smart kids studied in high school. Right. I didn't know it was in the liturgy. I didn't know ad ortem. I didn't know anything. So I just showed up to a TLM Mass. But I have to say, one of the things that struck me first was the faithful, families, younger, larger families, and fathers that were like really just engaged. And then I became friends with a lot of the people, and through their kindness, they befriended me. And before I even knew the priest, the faithful, that's what Christianity is supposed to be. It's supposed to be lived. And these people just going about their daily lives, showing up for Sunday Mass, never thinking that they're going to affect anybody else, affected me.
Right. That's great. And that's great. And of course, they always have a reputation as these big meanies, and they're judgmental and stuff like that. But here they take you, somebody who formerly lived a homosexual lifestyle, and they embrace you because, you're a child of God. And I find it's the same. You see that a lot where it's like they're just trying to live out their faith, and it's good that they're not, it's not quite the catacomb existence anymore. I mean, Pope Benedict obviously had a lot to do with that. So we're in a better shape now than we were back then. So,
I didn't, I've been around the tratty world for a while. So I did experience some of that a little bit. I have to say it was more on the fringes because I did go to that group. Not Pius the 10th. Is it Pius the 5th? There's
yes,
another
there's a
one.
price. Yes.
I was involved going there a little bit and Sede Conscious, and those could be a bit, I wouldn't say I ever experienced cruelty, but a bit judgmental, a bit,
Right.
yeah.
They attract a little bit more of a kind of personalities, I think, that are kind of off in the fringes because they feel like they're so out of it, and it almost people who want to be. And so I think a lot of times that they don't always have, they have personality issues, frankly. And so I wouldn't be surprised if you would experience that a little bit more.
So, but I have to say, in 99, I was, 29, 30 years old. And a lot of the people I met were the same age. So they were Catholics. A lot of times had the same experiences
Right.
with the church in the 70s and 80s, didn't really like it. Now they have kids. They're trying to figure out what to do. And I have to say, they were quite joyful discovering the TLM because it was like, oh
Right.
my gosh,
Yeah.
I finally found something. I'm not going to lose my faith.
Right.
So
Right.
I didn't experience a lot of, um, what do you call it, tratty behavior? I
Yeah.
didn't.
Yeah. I think a lot of that exists more on the fringes, like online, particularly. Like whenever most people who go to the TLM, the people they encounter there are good people with good hearts. They're sinners like the rest of us, but it's more like these often young people in their basements on and anonymous accounts and saying all this. That's kind of what gives it more than anything. But in real life, it's mostly just moms and dads with real, the dad's got to work and he's working most of the time, and the mom's taking care of the family, and that's the reality. They're just trying to grow in holiness. They're not going about like writing screeds on the internet or anything like that.
They don't have time. So
Right.
so so back to your list. So suggestion one was the Ad Orientem Mass, which is the priest facing east, but not necessarily facing east, but facing the altar of the
The altar,
tabernacle.
right? Same direction as the people. He's leading the people in worship. He's facing God because the tabernacle would be there on the altar, and so he's facing towards God.
And that was a big deal to me because especially growing up in the Novus Ordo, the the mass tended to become more priest-centered. Like,
Right,
is Father smiling? Who's he looking at? Who's he
right,
winking at? It becomes kind of sick. So
yeah,
at least when the priest, you don't see his face, it's not, the focus isn't on him and what he's doing and what he's saying and his personality.
right. And I think it's subconsciously when you're in front of a crowd and you're facing them, you're going to perform for them, and it's not even the best intentioned person. You just can't help it. It's only human. And so you start to look at it more as a performance, where if you're facing away from, you're facing towards the tabernacle, towards God, that's your audience. You're going to act a lot differently than when you're turned around and you're seeing all the faces of people, and there's that one person who doesn't like you, and there's that person who is causing problems, and oh, this person is a big donor and stuff like that. It's impossible to humanly not have that impact you, and so it becomes much less of a performance ad orientem does. And again, this is something to keep young men in, that you have the sense of a general leading us into battle, much more than we're sitting around the coffee table chatting.
That's it. Yep. And I go to Novus Ordo masses where the priest is ad orientem, and I have to say that one thing, it seems so minor and it seems like nothing. It just makes a huge difference.
I really think if you ask me what's one, Eric, you're allowed to change one thing, and only one thing, nothing else. It can't be like, okay, I'm going to change like everything. I'd be like, make all masses ad orientem, because I really think that one thing alone would change how people look at mass, and it would change worship, and it would change the whole way we think how we relate to God.
I agree, 100%. Number two is only men and I'm sorry. Number two, only men and boys at the altar. I laugh because it's so what would you say?
Un-PC.
Unpolitically correct. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I just think that men are supposed to be leaders. They're supposed to be the leaders. And so up at the altar, these are supposed to be the people that we're following into spiritual battle, so to speak. And so by having father and 13 women of different ages up there, that's telling us something subconsciously. And so it really should be just men and young men for servers up there. I know, for example, when we went to Novus Ordo Parish, and my son was young, and he grew up. He had no desire to be a server, and when we moved, he was about the age 8 or 9, something like that. And we started going to Latin Mass. All of a sudden, he started having interest in the servers because he saw these young men up there, only men.
Yep.
It was almost like a militaristic thing because
Totally.
they take their sharp turns and stuff like that. It's not like this casual, they're wearing gym shoes and just kind of hanging out there. But no, they're all very serious and they're all like this and stuff like that. And that attracted him. And he was like, hey, this is something I would like to do. And, he's still, he's in high school now and he still serves and loves it. And I think that is just a sign of the fact I think that would attract men. Like I said earlier, men and women both will follow men, but only women will follow women. And so if we have only men up there, I think that's a sign when a young man walks in the church, says, okay, this is serious. I got these men up here who are leading us into spiritual battle.
Yeah. This reminds me too of when I was a boy. I was a teenager. Well, one of these leprechaun priests, and this kind of makes a point that I forget, is that I think physicality doesn't necessarily connect with masculinity.
Right.
Because I've met men that are quite slight, and you wouldn't say,
right.
you could blow on them and they'd fall over. But
right.
they had a quite masculine persona. And this priest he was 5 foot, like nothing, 110 pounds. But when he walked in a room, everything just stopped. He had that authority about him.
Right.
And I think I was in the 7th grade, and he showed up at the parish and said, you're all being altar boys. And he didn't ask who wants to volunteer. And I was like, no way. Because at that point, I was already like pre-homosexual. I wasn't getting along with other boys. I was hanging out with the girls. And this priest said, no, you're all being altar boys. So, I showed up, and it was very much like you described. This was a Novus Ordo. But he ran that like the Marine Corps.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way you do it. Yeah.
He did. But we respected him. And you didn't show up 5 minutes late, 1 minute late, 30 seconds late. You just knew if you were late, you just didn't show up at all.
Right.
You wouldn't put up with it. So what was my point? Oh, but this was my life always took a tragic turn. But this was always, I say this sarcastically, but this was kind of at the tipping points. This would have been like 83. Okay. And this was when women were really coming in as extraordinary ministers.
Right.
So he left my first year, and another priest came in, and it was just all extraordinary ministers, women, and they took over the sacristy where they never were. Because there's like no all-male spaces left in Western culture, but that was one at that time.
That's right, yeah.
And then it ended.
And it still is now
all the boys left, and I was kind of like the last one, and then everybody left.
Right. And also it just says something, having all the men up there, young men, it reminds us, especially today in these days of gender confusion, that there is a difference. There is a difference between men and women, and that acting like they're all the same is just a signal we don't want to send to people, because if there's one place where you're not, where it's clearly defined the difference between men and women, it's at TLM, because it's like the men are up there and only men and women aren't allowed. And it tells us, there is a difference. It doesn't say one is better than the other. It just says they are definitely different from each other, and they have different roles to play in the church.
Right. And but that's part of the chaos of the church is that I always understood that altar boys, one of the purposes of them was to foster vocations
Right.
to the priesthood.
Right. It's supposed to be.
Yeah, so I never understood, well, I think I do, the impetus behind altar girls.
Right.
I think it was to foster vocations to the
Well,
priesthood.
and
Yeah.
it's abusive though in a way, because these young girls, they're told to become altar servers. They serve at the altar, and they're naturally then attracted to the priesthood because of their service. And then they're told, but no, you can't be a priest. It's like that was abusive to them to let them become altar servers, because you're giving them a direction and saying no, you can't do it. But really, if they never are all serve at the altar, then it's much more likely they're not going to feel that desire to maybe be a priest, which of course they can't be. So I think that that's almost abuse. I think it borders on abusive to let girls serve at the altar, frankly.
Yeah, yeah. The next number three was silence before and after mass.
And
Yeah.
nothing drives me crazy than you walk into a church and everybody's just yapping and stuff, and it's like you're trying to pray or something. But I really feel like the silence before and after mass and during mass, parts of silence where you don't always have to have the person tinkling on the piano or whatever. I think it's like it expresses a seriousness that we're here. This is not like everywhere else. I mean, that's the thing is weird is we've done so much. We have so much this desire to make mass relevant, but I'm saying no. We need to do the exact opposite. We need mass to be countercultural. That when you walk into a church, into the nave, and you're in the church, that you know this is not like everything else, and that's a good thing. And I think silence is one of those things, because you do not get silence anywhere anymore. I mean, you know, with the radios and with internet and with podcasts, everything, TV, everywhere you go. I mean, you can't even pump gas anymore without a TV in your face blaring at you. You can't even have silence there. So having silence, I think, expresses this seriousness, which I think is attractive to men and women, but it kind of tells men this is something serious. It's something that isn't to be taken lightly.
Yeah, the priest needs to do his job, but so does the laity. I mean, because you could you imagine going to the TLM and just starting a random conversation when people are in the? I mean, you would get laser beams at
Yeah.
you.
Oh, yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
And
people
eventually
just need
somebody would appropriately tell you, excuse me, you don't talk in here. So,
people need to project what is permissible and
right, right,
acceptable. And in most parishes, it's a free for all. It's really
right,
crazy. Sing traditional hymns is number
right,
4. Again, I never knew what the Latin mass was. I didn't know it. Yeah, but and I also didn't know what Gregorian
right,
chant was, except this very perverted form. I have to think back because in the 90s there were like some like disco groups that were
right,
incorporating Gregorian chant
right,
into the music because
right,
I think this is another story. I don't want to get into it, but I think people instinctively have this desire for the transcendent. And looking back, I couldn't figure it out. But the whole time I was gay in the 90s, I kept seeing it over and over again, especially with Madonna, the singer, because she was
right,
always incorporating all of this Catholic imagery
right,
into her
right,
music and her videos. And it wasn't the goofy 70s Catholic
right,
imagery, it was the pre Vatican II stuff
right,
that she was always using. And it was very appealing, especially to gay men
right,
because gay men instinctively, I think a lot of people think that they have a draw towards what's very feminine or fluffy or sissy-ish. They don't. It's the opposite. They have a very draw to the masculine,
right,
and
right.
traditional Catholic forms have that in it. So.
Yeah, and I think, you know, in Hollywood, when it wants to have a Catholic scene, they don't have Jesuit, you know, St. Louis Jesuit music playing
No.
and your typical suburban parish. No, what they show is they show one of these traditional old city churches, and they have Gregorian chant or something like that playing because everybody knows, oh, that's Catholic. And so I do think the music, again, it's seriousness, because what what normal man actually is attracted to St. Louis Jesuit 70s music? I mean, they just don't exist because that music is just so bad. But it's not just bad in the sense of like, oh, my personal preference, something like that. It
Right.
really undermines the sacredness of the liturgy. And so just naturally when you hear it, you think this isn't to be taken seriously because this music isn't serious. And so I feel like that having traditional hymns, what that does is it's a subconscious indicator that, okay, we're taking this seriously. This is not just us singing a ditty in front of the campfire or something like that.
It's very trite. Yeah.
Yes, very
And
trite. Yeah.
yeah, and I've seen in San Francisco, I've gone to concerts, traditional Gregorian mass concerts outside of a church setting, and people, it's very strange. Just hearing that music, people start going into a different frame of mind.
Right. Right.
And why
Yeah.
not
It was
incorporate
made
that
for.
in? Yeah, I know. Number 5, have a men's. Oh, this is fun. This is funny too. I laughed. Have a men's group that does service projects. Actually, does something.
Right.
That's very important.
We want to make everything is like we have to sit around and tell our feelings to each other. And yeah, there are appropriate times for a man to express his emotions and feelings to other men and things like that. I'm not saying that you never do that, but men don't. I mean, it's like when you're talking to another guy, usually what you're doing is you're facing the same way. You're sitting in the sitting and hunting or something like that, looking the same direction, or you're walking or something like that, even golfing or whatever the case may be. The point is that it's a whole different attitude than if you're sitting around the coffee table chatting about your feelings. And a men's group, you can have Bible studies and things like that, but go out and do something. Go and pray the rosary together in front of the abortion clinic. Go and work at the soup kitchen. Go and maybe you need to build, maybe the parish needs a grotto built that could be built on their grounds. Go get together with other men and do that. Those are type of things that bond men together in a masculine way, whereas women are much more likely, when they get together to talk, that's going to bond them, and that's a good thing. But for men, it's let's actually do stuff. We're not just going to sit around and talk about what this passage of scripture means to me, but we're going to actually live out our faith together as men.
I wish more Catholic men too. I don't know what the right word is. I guess is apostolic, would go out more. I mean, because where I've seen it
Right,
like really effective is like in pro-life men who
right.
get out. That is awesome. And I wish, this is my own kind of belly aching, but I wish those men would get more involved in what I'm trying to do with the gay community. And sometimes when I've gone out and I've gone to outreach and minister and I have those guys with me, it's awesome. It's crazy.
Yeah, and honestly, that is one of those. It's the lepers of society in the church that we just don't want to reach out to, the gay community. And I think for most men, we're incredibly intimidated by it because we're told over and over again that there's nothing wrong with it, and that you're a bigot and you're a terrible person for wanting to have them change their lives. And we're told that inside the church. I mean, obviously we're told by society, but we're told that inside the church as well. But you're right. It's like they need Jesus just like everybody needs Jesus. And so refusing to reach out to them, refusing to share the gospel with them, it's a terrible thing.
It's well, it's yeah, it's a vicious cycle because when I'm contacted by a parent who's having difficulty with a kid that identifies as LGBT, I can't think of one example where it was the dad. It's always the mother.
Right.
And then when I've gone to several of them. I've taken decades off my years in purgatory. I've gone to James Martin's, talks.
Yeah.
They're all women. They're all women
Right.
with I would say 9 out of 10 times they're mothers with a gay son.
Right. And that was my experience when I worked for a diocese, and we set up an Encourage chapter, but
Oh, God
also,
bless you.
yeah, and we also, but then, like, I remember this one woman came to me and she wanted to start up a ministry of homosexuals, but it was pro-homosexual. It was like, Father James Martin type of stuff. And sure enough, of course, her son was gay, and it was awful. And it was, and I tried to explain to her why, and I told her about Encourage, but she didn't want anything to do it. She wanted something that affirmed him, and And yeah, and then she told me how Pope Francis said, "Who am I to judge?" And so it was difficult.
Why are dads less willing to affirm their sons in homosexuality than mothers? And I don't think it has to do with any kind of toxic masculinity or homophobia. I think it's something deeper than that.
Isn't it true that in a lot of cases where a young man has homosexual tendencies, that often his father is absent or abusive or problematic anyway? He might not even be in the picture that much, which might be why it's the mothers who are always, when they get older, who are going to these things like Father James Martin, or in good cases they're going to encourage things like that, because the dad's just not around, and that's one of the factors that has led to the young man developing these homosexual tendencies. So that might be a lot of the answer right there.
All right. Let me steamroll because I've kept you too
Yeah.
long. Okay. Number 6, call them to make real sacrifices, men.
Right. And I think this is something that men want to make sacrifices down deep. I mean, a good man, we all recoil from sacrifice. I mean, I just like everybody, when you don't really love it, but the point is that when you sacrifice for a greater good, there is just something about that. And I feel like it's a stupid example, but I think it makes the point. We're talking about servers before. I remember one time I took my daughter to a softball tournament. This was when she was younger, and they had a sign up on at the field that said, "We're looking for young women to be on this softball team, this travel softball team, and it's going to be a high commitment. We're committed to it. You're going to have to really commit to this and spend a lot of practice hours, do all this stuff to be a top, but we're going to be a top-notch team." And I was like, okay, that's not for us, but I get that. But then we literally, my daughter and I went to a parish later, because it was a Sunday, we went to this parish, and they had a sign up for servers, and they said, "Boys and girls, please be a server. No commitment needed. It's real easy. There's nothing to do. You don't worry about it. It's like not that big a deal." And all this. And it played down any idea of like a sacrifice or any commitment to it. And I thought to myself, if I'm a young person, which of these two looks more attractive? The softball team does, because that's something calling me to be better than I am. Whereas the server's like, whatever. And I feel like that's what your average homily is: be nice. It's like, well, I'm already being nice. I mean, I feel like I am. So this isn't doing anything. But if it says, no, you need to step up, you need to pray an hour a day, you need to fast on a regular basis, you need to go out and pray at the abortion clinic, work at the soup kitchen, minister at a gay rights rally, something like that. These are the type of things you need to do. Well, first of all, you will turn off some people. I mean, the wimps are going to run for the hills, but you're going to
Yeah.
attract the people who are looking for something more in their life, and they're looking to sacrifice. And I think especially men, young men, are attracted to that, because I think they're naturally geared towards sacrificing for others. It's why men are born protectors, and they're more apt to be in military situations, because they take they take their identity from protecting other people and from making sacrifices for others.
Also, sacrifice in the family.
Yes.
I'm a one issue voter, but on the one issue that I focused on, the gay one, if fathers take a stand on that one, all hell is going to break loose, and
Right. Oh, yeah.
they're never going to suffer like that.
Yeah. And I think also just sacrifices, they're not even out inside the home, things like get off porn. I mean,
Ugh.
that's a big one. If dad is on porn, you don't think that's going to have a huge impact on the family? Things like that. That's a huge one. And but have you ever heard a priest say get off porn? I mean, and just say you've got to stop this. I mean, I understand in a family context you might have to word it a different way, but you can word it in a way that says, men, you've got to stop this. You got to do what you can. And yes, addictions develop, and you might have to go to even therapy in some cases, but go to confession when you fall. But I mean, there's a sacrifice that every man needs to do, especially in our culture today, where you're just bombarded with it everywhere you go.
Well, you quoted Our Lady of Fatima in that previous article about how more souls go to hell because of sins of the flesh, and the church has focused, and bishops, the cardinals, priests, more of the hierarchy, have focused on these prudential issues But people on the ground, people on the front lines, as Bishop Barron called them, these pelvic issues. That's the ones that are affecting their everyday lives: porn, homosexuality, contraception, sex outside of marriage. Those are the things that are affecting them every day, and that's the things that church don't talk
Right. And contraception, no one. When have you ever heard contraception condemned from the pulpit and typical Catholic parish? Never. I remember one time I heard one priest at a regular Novus Ordo parish condemn contraception. And I was like, oh my gosh, I will say, actually, that man's now a bishop.
about. Oh, God bless him.
Yeah. So
Wow.
hopefully he will, he was recently bishop in West Virginia. His name is blanking on me, but so hopefully he'll be a good bishop.
And then number 7, directly address the crisis in the church. Good luck. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's something where people know that there's corruption deep in the church and there's a crisis. Yet, if you go your typical parish, your typical diocese, what do? They talk about how vibrant they are, how great things are. I mean, it's basically they sing how great we are every single week. And it just drives me crazy how they say how vibrant a parish is, how vibrant a diocese is when people are, flocking to the doors and getting the heck out of there. And you have to address it. So, I mean, McCarrick, I was very happy that after McCarrick broke in 2018, there were priests and even a couple bishops who finally spoke out when they hadn't before. But we need more of that where they're willing to say, yes, there's a real crisis and it goes all the way to the top. And there's real corruption in the church that includes the bishops. But no priest ever wants to speak out. There are priests, there are exceptions, and God bless them. But so many priests just keep their head down. And what happens is we all know, the laity all know how corrupt a lot of these bishops are. But then when all the priests and the bishops, other bishops keep their heads down, it's demoralizing. And people, they always want to say like, oh, don't dwell on that and don't focus on that because that just turns people away. And when you talk about these bad things in the church, people will turn away and won't want to be Catholic. And I say it's the exact opposite. Not that you dwell on it, but that if you ignore it, people who are interested in the church already know there's stuff going on. And when they see they ignore it, they're like, I don't want to do anything with this. This is obviously an unhealthy organization if they're ignoring their own problems. I don't want to be part of that. And I've had people contact me, a number of people contact me since I started becoming more publicly willing to say that there's corruption in the church. I've had people come to me who said that helped them become Catholic or helped them stay in the faith because they're like, well, thank God there are Catholics who are willing to say out loud what is obvious. And somebody like you with what you've been doing is another great example where it's like you're saying we got a big problem here. We can't just shove it under the carpet, which is what we've been doing for so long, because people are going to know that's not a healthy organization that does that.
I know priests that have done that, have spoken out on the crisis in the church, and the thing that they all have in common is that they've all suffered and are suffering.
Yes. And hopefully they can offer up those sufferings to the Lord and he can use that for good.
Well, gosh, this is ending on it. Well, it is a happy note because you took a brave stand. This was an open letter that you wrote to your bishop in August 8th, 2019. Could you just give I want to read just a couple of passages from it because, I mean, you said you admired me and thank you, I'm humbled and I appreciate it. But when I read this, I was like, damn, Eric, wow, this is awesome. So could you give a little background to why you wrote this letter?
Sure. So I live in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, and our bishop, Archbishop Schnurr, is, I would say, I rank, if you look at all the bishops, there's some that are just awful and corrupt and terrible, and there's a few bright lights out there, and the majority of them are just kind of there, and they kind of are range from good to bad. And I would say my bishop, you put him closer on the good range, or I guess that's this way, on the good range. He does a lot of good things, and for example, he said something publicly against Father James Martin once, and so when he was coming to our diocese to speak, he was like, no, he's not approved or anything like that. So I want to say that first. However, what happened is that this was in 2019. There was a priest who was reassigned to a parish, one of the bigger parishes in our diocese, with a school attached to it. And it was actually where my daughters, they were in a scout group that met at this parish. And the pastor, who was assigned there, he had had a history of some abusive actions with young men. And the auxiliary bishop, knew about it before he was reassigned and allowed it to happen anyway. But then the bishop himself knew about it, the archbishop knew about it for quite some time before it became public. And then after it became public, he was then, of course, removed from ministry. And I was aghast at this. This wasn't in 2001. This was in 2019, after even McCarrick. So not only after 2002, the Dallas Charter, all that crap, but after McCarrick, we still have a situation where a bishop knows that a priest is guilty of these things, and he has him at a parish with a school attached to it as the pastor, and does nothing about it. Not until it becomes public does he then pull him out. And I was scandalized by that. And I mean, it's kind of funny, to almost like comical to be scandalized at this point after all that's happened over the past 20 years. But yet that's what bothered me so much, was that there was no excuse anymore. Maybe in 1999 we'll say you were kind of clueless about things. I don't know. I don't really want to give them an excuse either. But this is 2019. There was no excuse. And so I wrote that letter out of frustration, because I know having worked for a diocese before, writing a letter to the bishop has little impact in the world. I mean, sometimes it's appropriate to do because you feel like you need to do something and say you've done your duty, and it's all you can do. So if you write to the bishop, God bless you. But I wanted to make it a little more public and just say that this was a scandal, and that I was also disappointed because the public response, the archbishop basically threw the auxiliary under the bus and kind of blamed him for everything. And I was like, no, be a man, like that's what we've been talking about. Take responsibility and say, I knew about this, and what I did was terrible, and I shouldn't have done it. But instead, it was kind of like these excuses, and it just drove me crazy.
I don't blame you. This is
a bishop, like I said, who's not a bad bishop. That's what was so frustrating. That's what's so corrupting about it was, and so terrible about it is, we're not talking about one of the extreme, cases like a Cardinal Wuerl or somebody like that. We're talking about your run-of-the-mill decent guy, and he's doing this. That should tell us that we have corruptions very deep in the church.
Yep. You wrote this. If someone wants salvation in Jesus Christ, he should look to the Catholic Church. But if he wants a safe environment for his children and a place where leaders actually live out and believe what they preach, then he needs to look anywhere but the Catholic Church. What a terrible predicament you and your fellow bishops have put people in.
Yeah, and I hated writing that, because that's the.
I hated reading it.
Yeah.
But I got really emotional when I first read it, because it's true. I have a very difficult time, because I outreach to vulnerable people, not minors, adults, vulnerable adults. For a long time, I did not feel comfortable recommending the Catholic Church to them. Now I don't anymore.
Which is just an indictment, because I truly believe the Catholic Church is the Church of Jesus Christ. But I also believe that the men running it in so many cases have obscured the grace and the truth of it, and just a safe environment for your kids. That's what's so, and what drives me crazy is, like, since 2002, leaders and priests have been falling all over themselves to say it's not so bad anymore. We've got it all fixed. But yet these things keep on coming up. I mean, there's that scandal that just happened in Louisiana where the priest was with a prostitute on the altar filming it. And that guy was ordained in like 2013 or something like that. And he was already a pastor of a parish. And it's just like, stop telling me it's all fine now. It's not. I would not trust. I mean, I would, if I had my son, fortunately, he's almost 18, and he's a big, strong guy, and nobody's going to mess with him, which is nice. And I've told him, don't let anybody mess with you. But I would not allow if I had a young son, and I don't allow my young girls, I just can't trust in a typical parish environment. I'm just not going to let them, because I don't trust any of them, because they have a history. You have to prove it to me over time that you're serious about protecting these young, vulnerable and older vulnerable people. And they just haven't proven that to me yet. And I've yet to, I can't think off the top of my head of any bishop who's talked about this who I didn't feel like it was vetted by a lawyer first. It's like, talk in spiritual terms as our shepherd. Screw the lawyers. Screw the speak of like, all this. We've put in these systems to protect people, stuff like that. No, say, get in sackcloth and ashes, sit in front of your parish church or your cathedral, repent of your sins, and do penances for the sins of the clergy under you. And then we'll talk, and then I'll take you seriously that you mean it. But until then, your lawyerese documents and statements mean nothing to me. The CEO of Kroger can talk like that, but not my shepherd. He's not supposed to talk like that.
No.
Sorry, I get a little heated about this.
No. It's okay. I want to read one other thing, and then I'm gonna. But I think the abuse crisis has entered a different phase. I think not through any actions of the bishops, but just because the survivors came forward and filed lawsuits. That I think the abuse of minors, I don't think it's impossible, but I think it's much more difficult to get away with nowadays.
Right. Yes.
But I think the new phase is abuse and predation of adults,
right,
specifically of vulnerable adults in the church, and not necessarily by the clergy, by this. I've tried to talk about this and nobody will talk about it with me, by laity within the church. I've seen this going on.
Right.
And here,
like parish staff and people like music ministers and stuff like that.
Exactly. Yes. You wrote, what would I and many Catholics like to see from our shepherds? True repentance and a real embrace of the fullness of the Catholic faith. I'm not being hyperbolic when I say I would like to see you in sackcloth and ashes in front of the cathedral, begging for forgiveness from God and from your sheep. Further, I want to see a clear denunciation of homosexuality in the priesthood and a removal of all priests who are known either publicly or within the corridors of the chancery to engage in homosexual activity. Then I would know that you are serious about actual reform, instead of being yet another bishop surrounded by lawyers, giving the same CYA advice we've seen for decades. Programs and charters don't convert hearts or lead people to Christ. Yet that is all that is offered from our church officials who don't seem to recognize sin and its destructive force. Thank you. That says it all. That's it right there. But not one of them, like you said, has done that. Maybe right. The only one, and he's been here to me and I got to interview him, was Bishop Strickland, because I think at that 2018 USCCB meeting, I think it was in Baltimore, he left the meeting.
That's right.
Went to where the Catholic unwashed Catholic laity were meeting, including a lot of abuse survivors, and he went and prayed with them and met with them. And I said, Bishop Strickland, what a different church it would be today if every one of those bishops walked out of that USCCB meeting and did that, but you were the only one.
Right, and God bless them. And one thing I wanted to add, after I wrote that open letter, I found out from very reliable sources that one of the priests that's assigned at the cathedral in our diocese, he had some activities in his background where he was caught in a gay park or something with another guy and stuff. And he's to this day, he's still an associate at the cathedral parish. And they don't do anything about it because, like you said, it's not an abuse of minors. It's not an illegal thing, but clearly this guy is problematic. And here's the thing. When I tried to bring that up, I had Catholics, lay Catholics, go against me for saying something about it because they were like, oh, he's a good guy. How dare you, say anything against him? I'm like, he literally was arrested for being with another guy at a gay park and engaging in relations. And now he is at the cathedral as an associate pastor, and you're fine with your kids being an altar server under him. It's like, it just makes no sense to me. And until we have this righteous anger that such a thing should be unacceptable, and the bishops think that's unacceptable, we're just going to continue to have these problems. But God bless somebody like Bishop Strickland, because I think he's about the only one at this point who's even trying in this area.
And that priest that you mentioned, I mean, I'm a great believer in conversion, and he
Right.
could live an exemplary life, but I think priests need to be held to a higher standard
Right.
because they do have souls. You know, its souls are entrusted to them, and they do have a lot of influence over people, children, and vulnerable people.
Right.
So they have to be held
Yeah, I
to
mean,
a higher
that guy could end
standard.
up being a saint, but he
Exactly.
shouldn't be a practicing priest. I
No,
mean, yeah.
I agree. Wow, what a mess. Now, besides those seven things, what I always try to end this on a happy note.
Oh, good.
I always like to tell men, like, what can you do today? You know, when you get up in the morning, you know, be more engaged with your families, pray. You know, what can they do right away? You know?
I really think that men have to build a life of prayer and fasting. First of all, I do think that every man should be praying an hour a day. Now, if you're not praying, if you're only praying a couple minutes a day, okay, don't go to an hour the first day. You build up. You add 5 minutes here, you add 5 minutes next week. You know, you build up to get to an hour, and you make your day go around that hour. Usually, it's best to start your day like that, but it depends on the person and their schedule. So, hour a day of prayer. So the rosary, spiritual reading, reading the Bible, things like that, the divine office, things like that. But I also do, I'm a strong believer, and because I didn't do this for years myself, is that we do need to fast. We need to actually, men particularly, women, my wife actually leads a fasting group on a regular basis on Facebook where she helps people know how to fast practically, which I think is a blessing because it really helps people. But I'm a little disappointed that maybe it's just because her friend, it's mostly women in the group, and God bless them. And I wish more men would get involved in this because we need it's a time tested way of sacrifice and kind of putting power into our prayers. In fact, Jesus himself said, when you fast, here's what you do. He said that in Matthew 6 in Sermon on the Mount. He didn't say if you fast. He said when you fast, because he assumes that his followers will fast. And so but we've completely lost the whole concept of fasting. So I think if we just start with that, prayer and fasting, I honestly believe that men, if they do that regularly, so you pray an hour a day and you fast at least once a week, then what will happen is I think God will lead you. You'll hear him too. He will lead you to what you're specifically supposed to do in your life, how you're supposed to lead your family, how maybe you're supposed to be involved in the church. I mean, the family comes first, but how you're supposed to do, I really do think that that will become clear to you. Because I honestly think that if you try to get, for example, involved in the church and help it, but you're not doing the prayer and fasting, you're doing more harm than good. You're probably going to harm your family. You're probably going to harm your own spiritual life. You're probably not going to help other people. But if you pray and fast, you're going to help your family. You're going to help the church.
Yes, if only they would talk about this in the church, because just like I think Jordan Peterson is kind of a spiritual figure. So is like Joe Rogan, because he's been
Right. Yeah.
talking about fasting
Yeah.
recently, and there's a certain
Yeah.
amount of like discipline in this guy that men admire. But I just wish, well, it is changing, because what's given me hope, and I'll end it with this, what's given me hope to stay in the Catholic Church, and why I've stuck around, especially for the last couple of years, is that laymen in the church like you and Steve Skocek and Taylor Marshall and other guys have given me a lot of hope, because you're actually living it. You're fathers, husbands, and Catholic men, and you've been able to remain sane somehow. So
Yeah, we try. Yeah, well, I appreciate that, and I'm honored. But
God
I
bless you.
and I, like I started with, I just want to say I really admire the work you've done, and I just feel like you're the one who's working with the lepers of today, and that's a great example for all of us.
Thank you. Thank you. Hey, God bless you, Eric. Many
Yeah, God
blessings.
bless you too, Joseph.